Carlos Alcaraz's wrist injury looks like it's worse than we expected.
He's going to lose a lot of points to defend in such a critical stage.
The fastest forehand on the planet has always come with an invisible, devastating price tag. For 4 months, the medical files coming out of Barcelona were guarded behind closed doors, while millions of fans wondered if their champion was slipping away. On Thursday, August 20th, the global silence shattered when Carlos announced, "Here we go," to confirm his flight to New York. But beneath the headlines, the brutal reality cannot be hidden anymore. At 23, Carlos Alcaraz finally confirms what we all suspected. He is not easing his way back into tour life, and he is not taking a cautious developmental year. Carlos is stepping straight onto the unforgiving concrete of Arthur Ashe Stadium to defend 2,000 champion points completely cold. Ever since acute tenosynovitis flared inside his 6th extensor compartment on April 14th in Barcelona against Otto Virtanen, Carlos has lived through a career-altering blackout. Under the direction of Dr. Angel Ruiz Cotoro, scans revealed that generating 3,200+ RPMs of heavy topspin with radical wrist hyperextension had pushed his right tendon sheath to the brink of structural failure. The consequences tore through his season with brutal force. Carlos was forced to forfeit Roland Garros and withdraw from Wimbledon, watching over 4,300 ranking points vanish into thin air. When he pulled out of the Cincinnati Open on August 4th, Spanish insiders leaked that he was practicing at barely 50% capacity, deliberately holding back on full-power flat first serves to prevent his tendon sheath from tearing. Former champions warned that entering 5-set Grand Slam wars on hard courts without warm-up tournaments was an astronomical gamble with his athletic longevity. Yet, working alongside head coach Samuel Lopez inside the private training compound of Murcia, Carlos made his final choice. After testing his wrist in multi-hour, high-intensity sparring sessions with world number 7 Holger Rune, Carlos made the irreversible call. Now the trial begins. Carlos walks onto Arthur Ashe Stadium to defend his crown against 36 years of tournament history. Since the ATP Masters 1000 series was established in 1990, not a single men's singles champion has ever captured the US Open after skipping both Canada and Cincinnati. With world number 1 Jannik Sinner also battling a right knee issue, the tournament has been blown wide open. Has Carlos Alcaraz found a way to conquer an anatomical limit, or is he walking straight into an unavoidable physical ambush in New York? The untold medical and biomechanical truth behind his right wrist reveals just how dangerous this championship defense truly is. The human hand was never engineered to withstand the violent mechanics of modern tennis. When you strip away the bright stadium lights, the celebrity player boxes, and the polished television graphics, championship tennis is an uncompromising trial of biomechanical shock. Every time an elite athlete strikes a ball, hundreds of foot-pounds of raw kinetic energy reverberate through the racket frame, traveling up the carbon graphite handle and crashing directly into the carpal tunnel, the wrist retinaculum, and the microscopic synovial sheaths that stabilize the tendons. For 4 straight months, that anatomical reality became a suffocating prison for Carlos Alcaraz. To understand why his hidden medical data ignited such intense panic across Spain, you have to look inside the delicate architecture of his right arm. Carlos doesn't hit conventional ground strokes. He generates the most explosive, whipping rotational torque the sport has ever recorded. When he sets his feet and coils his hips to unleash his signature forehand, his right wrist drops into extreme radial deviation and deep hyperextension. At the split second before contact, his forearm musculature contracts with explosive violence, snapping the racket head forward and upward to generate over 3,200 RPMs of biting, heavy topspin. That sudden kinetic whip creates immense downward shear stress. Every single ounce of that rotational load channels directly through the 6th extensor compartment, specifically the sheath protecting the extensor carpi ulnaris tendon. Under normal conditions, synovial fluid lubricates that sheath, allowing the tendon to glide effortlessly back and forth across the ulnar groove. But when repetitive microtrauma overwhelms the tissue, the synovial fluid turns toxic with inflammation. The sheath thickens, rubs directly against bone, and creates excruciating friction. That condition is acute tenosynovitis, and left unchecked, the resulting scar tissue causes permanent, irreversible joint stiffness. That was the nightmare that began on April 14th in Barcelona against Otto Virtanen. The moment Dr. Ángel Ruiz Cotoro reviewed the emergency ultrasound scans in Barcelona, the entire Spanish medical team went into lockdown. They knew the history. They had seen what wrist tendon trauma does to generational careers. In 2010, Juan Martín del Potro was 21 years old, fresh off conquering Roger Federer to win the US Open, and poised to dominate the sport for a decade. Then, his extensor tendon sheath ruptured. Del Potro spent 4 prime athletic years undergoing 4 agonizing surgeries, completely losing his peak and rebuilding his game around a defensive backhand slice. A decade later, Dominic Thiem suffered a right wrist sheath tear at age 27 on the grass of Mallorca. Thiem underwent months of conservative therapy and avoided open surgery, but the joint never regained its structural elasticity. His explosive whip was permanently compromised, his ranking collapsed outside the top 300, and he was forced into early retirement before his 31st birthday. Wrist injuries in tennis are the ultimate career killers because tendons have almost zero direct vascular supply. They heal at a microscopic, glacial pace. Carlos Alcaraz had started 2026 playing the most devastating tennis of his life, capturing his maiden Australian Open in Melbourne over Novak Djokovic to complete a historic career Grand Slam at just 22 years old. Yet, in a matter of weeks, the calendar stripped him of everything he had built. Carlos was forced to withdraw from Madrid and Rome. In late May, he made the agonizing announcement to forfeit Roland Garros, surrendering his French Open crown and 2,000 ranking points. Weeks later, he withdrew from Queen's Club and Wimbledon. Over 4,300 ranking points evaporated in less than 60 days. While Carlos sat in clinical rehabilitation in Murcia, Jannik Sinner swept through London to capture his 5th Grand Slam title, opening an unassailable lead at world number 1. Alexander Zverev pushed past him in the live standings. The psychological toll was suffocating, but behind the scenes, a radical tactical transformation was already underway. To understand why this comeback is the ultimate high-wire act, look closely at Carlos's 3 signature weapons. Only one of them threatens to tear his wrist apart under live tournament fire. See if you can spot which one before we break it down. First, consider his two-handed backhand. It's an underrated masterpiece. Carlos hits it with a low center of gravity, stepping forward 3 feet behind the baseline and using his non-dominant left arm to drive the racket through the contact zone. The left arm absorbs the primary kinetic impact, leaving his healing right wrist completely shielded from aggressive torque. Second, look at his trademark drop shot. It's the ultimate psychological weapon on tour, breaking opponents mentally by killing the ball's momentum from deep behind the baseline. Yet, the drop shot is built purely on touch, soft hands, and deceleration. It requires gentle racket manipulation, not violent muscular contraction. That leaves only one weapon, the devastating, heavy topspin forehand. If you guess the forehand, you're looking at the exact structural fulcrum of his entire career. When Carlos lags the racket behind his body, the extensor carpi ulnaris tendon stretches to its anatomical limit. When he whips the frame forward to hit a 100-mile-per-hour winner on the dead run, hundreds of pounds of kinetic force snap through that single joint. If that wrist hesitates by even 5 milliseconds in a tight 5th set on Arthur Ashe, the ball sprays wide, the forehand penetration disappears, and the champion collapses. 1 shot, 1 joint, 7 best-of-5 set rounds. Inside the private training facilities of Murcia, the responsibility of saving Carlos's physical future fell onto head coach Samuel Lopez. Samuel Lopez, who officially took over as head coach following Carlos's separation from former coach Juan Carlos Ferrero in December 2025, brought decades of deep technical expertise and quiet discipline to the camp. Having helped guide Carlos to 16 straight wins to start 2026, Lopez understood that they could not simply wait for the tendon sheath to heal. They had to physically re-engineer how Carlos strikes a tennis ball. If Carlos returned to the tour with his old mechanics, the joint would re-tear within 48 hours of live tournament play. Working closely with Babolat engineers and sports biophysicists, Samuel Lopez executed a complete structural overhaul of Carlos's equipment. They dropped his racket string tension by 4 full pounds. A looser string bed creates a softer, more forgiving trampoline effect, increasing ball dwell time and allowing the string bed, rather than the player's forearm, to absorb the violent kinetic shockwaves of heavy incoming ground strokes. Beneath the grip wrap, Lopez inserted custom polymer dampening sheets to insulate the carpal bones and filter out high-frequency vibrational chatter. Then came the mechanical reconstruction. For weeks, Carlos was forbidden from hitting with live tennis balls. Samuel Lopez had him execute hundreds of shadow swings in front of biomechanical mirrors with unstrung frames. The goal was clear: retrain his kinetic chain. Lopez forced Carlos to generate baseline pace through lower body coiling, deep knee flexion, and core rotational drive, intentionally minimizing the aggressive, snapping wrist flexion that had overloaded his extensor sheath for years. By offloading mechanical stress from the wrist to the larger muscle groups of the torso and hips, they created a protective barrier around the healing joint. Yet when the camp attempted to ramp up intensity for live match simulations ahead of Cincinnati, reality dealt them a crushing blow. Spanish insider Emilio Sanchez leaked a sobering revelation to European media. Carlos was practicing at barely 50 to 55% of his standard capacity. While Carlos could trade steady, rhythmic ground strokes from the back of the court, he was completely unable to hit maximum power first serves. The biomechanics of a 135-mile-per-hour flat serve require radical upward extension followed by explosive internal pronation and violent downward wrist snap at peak contact. That downward whip placed unsustainable torsional pressure on the newly repaired tendon sheath. On August 4th, Carlos made the painful decision to withdraw from Cincinnati. The withdrawal stripped another 1,000 defending champion points from his profile and left him without a single competitive preparation match before New York. Injury intelligence specialist Stephen Smith, founder of global sports analytics firm Kitman Labs, sounded an urgent alarm. Smith warned that when an elite athlete enters Grand Slam competition, operating at 50% under extreme heat, the human body subconsciously overcompensates. To protect an inflamed joint, the kinetic chain breaks down. The elbow locks, the shoulder rotator cuff takes on unnatural loads, and the spine absorbs awkward rotational torque, multiplying the risk of severe secondary muscular tears. The season appeared on the verge of total collapse. Carlos needed an absolute, definitive stress test under live fire. That definitive test arrived on Monday, August 17th, at the Real Sociedad Club de Campo in El Palmar, Murcia. Carlos invited world number 7 Holger Rune to his private training compound. Rune, mounting his own aggressive return from an Achilles tendon injury suffered in Stockholm, brought world-class intensity and unrelenting competitive aggression to the court. Spanish journalists José Morón and Fernando Perales broke the exclusive details of what unfolded under the blistering Murcia sun. Over the course of multiple days, culminating in an intense 4-hour sparring session on August 20th, Carlos pushed his body to peak output. For the first time since April, Carlos took off the mental handbrake. Wearing a supportive black compression sleeve over his right arm, Carlos unleashed full-power topspin forehands, stepped inside the baseline to take balls on the rise, and cracked full-speed first serves directly into Rune's body. Rune pushed him to the absolute edge, dragging Carlos into exhausting 25-shot baseline exchanges that forced him to slide, brake hard on concrete, and absorb heavy kinetic impact on the dead run. They completed 2 full sets at tournament speed. Eyewitnesses close to the court reported that the forehand exploded with devastating pace and penetration. Most importantly, when Dr. Ruiz Cotoro conducted post-training diagnostic ultrasounds, the extensor sheath showed 0 fluid buildup, 0 acute inflammation, and perfect structural integrity under dynamic load. The decision was locked. On Thursday, August 20th, Carlos posted his official declaration, "Here we go," with an American flag emoji. The flight to New York was confirmed. On August 30th, Carlos Alcaraz steps onto Arthur Ashe Stadium to defend 2,000 ranking points as the reigning US Open champion. He does so carrying the weight of 36 years of tournament history against him. Since the ATP Masters 1000 series was established in 1990, not a single men's singles champion has ever captured the US Open after skipping both the Canadian Open and the Cincinnati Open. 36 years of tournament records prove that winning 7 best-of-5 set matches requires competitive match repetitions under real scoreboard pressure. Most analysts are focusing on his Round 1 opener, but they are looking in the wrong place. Round 1 is carried by 23,000 screaming fans, raw adrenaline, and the euphoria of stepping back onto Arthur Ashe Stadium. Adrenaline acts as a natural anesthetic, masking minor rust and dulling joint discomfort for 2 or 3 sets. The real danger zone is Round 2. In Round 2, the initial adrenaline crash hits. Your muscles are sore, lactic acid sits heavy in your legs, and you face a hungry, unseated opponent who has spent 48 hours studying every single hesitation in your right forearm. That is where 5-set hardcourt tennis turns ruthless. Acrylic hard courts offer zero give. Every abrupt stop sends violent shockwaves straight up through the ankles, into the knees, and directly into the forearm tendons. In a bizarre coincidence, world number 1, Jannik Sinner, also withdrew from Cincinnati with a right knee injury, leaving the field wide open. Novak Djokovic, hunting his record-breaking 25th major title, and Alexander Zverev see their greatest opportunity to strike. Opposing coaches are already designing aggressive tactical game plans to target Carlos's recovering joint. Rivals will deliberately feed heavy, kicking topspin deep into his forehand strike zone, forcing his right wrist to lay back and absorb high-impact torque at uncomfortable chest-height contact points. They will use biting drop shots to test his forward sprint breaking on concrete. Carlos Alcaraz decided to confirm what we all suspected because great champions do not run from physical danger. On August 30th, the private sparring sessions in Murcia and Samuel Lopez's technical overhaul will face the ultimate trial by fire. Carlos will have to prove to the entire sporting world that his generational genius is powerful enough to conquer both 36 years of history and the physical limits of his own body. When the lights go up on Arthur Ashe Stadium, medical opinions, ranking mathematics, and clinical theories cease to matter. Carlos Alcaraz didn't spend 4 grueling months in silence just to play defense with his career. By boarding that flight to New York and locking his focus on Arthur Ashe Stadium, he threw conventional sports medicine out the window. Every statistical model screams that skipping Montreal and Cincinnati is a direct recipe for an early Grand Slam exit. 36 years of tournament history stand like a stone wall in front of him. Yet, true greatness isn't measured by how safely an athlete protects their ranking, it is defined by how fearlessly they step into the storm. Under head coach Samuel Lopez, the technical redesign was exhaustive. The string tension was lowered, the dampeners were inserted, and the kinetic chain was retrained to protect that 6th extensor compartment. But no biomechanical adjustment in a Murcia practice session can simulate the raw, unforgiving friction of 5-set hard-court tennis when 23,000 fans are screaming and the temperature pushes past 95 degrees. Carlos is stepping onto the fastest acrylic concrete in North America with 2,000 points on the line, an untested right wrist, and zero safety net. If that repaired tendon holds firm through 7 rounds of brutal warfare, this title defense will stand as one of the most astonishing acts of athletic defiance the sport has ever witnessed. If it buckles, the fallout will redefine his entire career. The silence is broken. The decision is made. The ultimate trial begins now. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now so you catch our real-time tactical breakdowns and injury updates the moment tournament play gets underway.